Judy and I are both cat people, and we've shared our lives with a number of cats over the years. And we had a cat years ago. I think Judy brought him home, if I'm not mistaken. And he was a beautiful cat. He was colored, and his coloring was very wild looking. He looked like he would belong to a wild cat family of some kind. And his coat was made up of stripes of grays and browns and all different shades of it. And there'd be little tiny spots in there, but not the spots you see in some cats where there are these big patches, but these little spots would be in there, and they added to the wildness of him. And so when we looked at him as a kitten, he had these really big ears as a kitten, and he had some really big feet, and so we called him Lynx, because to us, he reminded us of a really wild cat. So Lynx, he took his name to heart, and he became the biggest cat that I've ever shared my life with. I mean, this guy was huge. And when he would jump up on a bed or on a couch or something, if you were in another part of the house, you would hear it. You would literally hear him hit the bed or the couch. And he had a presence about him. And he was a very gentle and sweet cat, but he was very, very independent. And we were living at a time, we lived in Paradise at that time, and we had a house that was quite a ways back from the street, kind of a long driveway. And in between the house and the road it was very forested. It was some pine trees, and there was a lot of ivy, and there were some, manzanita and those kinds of things. And so it was a great buffer to the street. And so we raised him as an inside-outside cat. So he had free reign to go out or to come in whenever he wanted to. And it was funny because he got to, when he wanted in, he would pull at the bottom of the screen door on the front door of our house. It was like there was a human being out there knocking on the door. It was amazing, and so he would come in and eat and hang out. And sometimes he'd spend the night in the house, and sometimes he wouldn't. And he did whatever he pleased. And in terms of affection and in terms of hanging out with us and being close to us, it was always on his terms. He could be incredibly affectionate or loving and caring and present if he chose to. If he didn't choose to, then he wouldn't. And I remember times, what was really funny was I'd be out in the yard sometimes doing some yard work, and when I would be out in the yard with him, it was almost, he looked at me with almost disdain, because it was almost like, what are you doing out here? What are you doing in my domain out here? And I kind of wondered if he was embarrassed to all the other cats in the neighborhood or all the other animals say, yeah, I'm hanging out with this guy here, But anyway, he was this wonderful family member and companion for us. And so one morning he came in, and we noticed that one of his eyes was a little bit swollen, like someone, another cat or another animal of some kind had really clobbered him that night. And it was kind of watery and swollen. And I looked at his face, and he had a little bit of a gash on his face, but it seemed to be kind of healed. And I think I went in and got some antibiotic cream that we had in the medicine cabinet, and I smeared it on there. He didn't really like that at all. He fought me the whole time. And when he didn't like something and he wanted to get away from me, he could get away from you, because that's where he used his size and his strength. And so I dabbed some on him, and then he had enough of that, and he was gone. But over the next several days, he began to develop a real puffiness on that side of his face, and it went into just being completely swollen, and that one eye was almost closed. And so, I was afraid of what was going on with him, and so we had a crate an animal crate that you take to the bed, and so I had to wait till he came into the house, because I couldn't get him outside. And so he came in, and I got him cornered, and I grabbed him, and I was trying to get him in that crate, and he had his feet just straight out, and he was fighting me the whole way, and he started to do this incredible yowl. Excuse me. And but I got him into the crate, I got him to the vet, and what they said is that he had been struck by, they think, another cat. And the thing about cats is they have a very thick skin, and when infection or a wound kind of goes under the skin, then it can be a real problem, because they tend to heal very quickly in their skin. It's hard to penetrate their skin. And so the vet was going to have to go in and cut that, they did surgery on it, they cut it open, they drained it out and everything. And they sent him home, and he had stitches, and he had a tube running out, because they said we have to have that stuff drained out of there. It's got to heal from the inside out, or else we'll have the same problem. So I wondered, how in the world are we going to deal with him, walking around with this tube in his face because he was so independent. I didn't know how he was going to handle it. But what was really interesting was when I think about when he fought me to get into the crate, but he came home from being handled by the vet and had this tube, it was almost like something had kind of changed in him in terms of almost what I would call a surrender, a resignation. And we allowed him to go inside now, but he tended to spend more time in the house doing, just hanging out. And he was quieter. It's interesting about animals and what they can teach us. He understood and he resigned himself to the fact that he was going into a healing mode. And so the vet checked him a week later, and then she told me, she said, in a few days, I want you to, and you can do this at home, you don't have to bring him in. I want you to cut those stitches, and I want you to pull that tube out of his face. And then we're going to, she goes, I think by then it will heal okay. She goes, do you think you can handle that? Yeah, I can handle that. I was inside, I was thinking, you got to be kidding me. I'm not, I don't do that kind of stuff, right? But she asked me if it'd be okay. So I said, okay, I had my mouth write a check that I'm not sure that I could cash, but anyway, I said, yeah, I can do that. So a few days went by, and she told me kind of what to look for in terms of what was happening, and I started to see it. And so this one day, I was home alone. Judy was at work, and I felt like, okay, this is the day that I need to do this. And so he came to the front door, and I let him in. And so when I did that, I went and I got a towel, and I came out in the front room. I set the towel on the arm of this chair we had, and I pulled out. I was carrying a Swiss Army knife at that time, and it had the little scissors on it. So I kind of pulled that out of my pocket, and I just kind of went and sat in the chair, and I thought, okay, how am I going to get a hold of him? Because I'm going to have to hold him down. I'm going to have to, I was visualizing in my mind, I'm going to have to hold him down, hold his body down, hold his head down, cut these stitches, pull this thing out. I don't want to hurt him worse or anything like that. And so I'm just sitting there. It was interesting because he'd gone into the kitchen and gotten something to eat, and he came out in the front room. And he kind of plopped down in the middle of the room the way cats do. They sit back on their haunches and just kind of looked at me sitting there. And I just sat there, and we kind of looked at each other in silence for a while. And so I patted my leg, hoping that maybe he would come towards me. And it took him a while, and then he kind of came towards me and got to the point to where if I stood up and bent over, I could get a hold of him. And I was really worried about that because I thought if I made my move, he's going to be gone. And if he realizes what I'm going to be doing, that wasn't going to work. So I sat there for a while, and I got up and I kind of bent over, and he never moved a muscle, and he allowed me to pick him up. And not only did he allow me to pick him up, he allowed his body to become pliable enough for me to position in my lap and to get this towel ready. And I sat there looking at him. He had the most beautiful amber eyes, these huge eyes, and he just looked up at me, and we looked at each other. And, I'm not the kind of person who's had a lot of experiences, kind of like what you call spiritual or connection experiences with other beings, four-legged beings, the way I know that a lot of you have. I hear about it all the time. But that was one of the closest. It was amazing. We just sat there for a moment. And so I gently took his head, and I kind of moved it over so I could get a straight shot. He just completely allowed me to do this. And when I turned his head, he closed his eyes. And I took my little Swiss Army knife, and I clipped these stitches, and I pulled them out. And he just did that great, Buddha yoga breathing, deep breathing. He just breathed. And now it was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I really had no idea how long this tube was. I didn't know where it went. I just saw the outside of it. And so I started to pull it out and thought, man, this is where he's going to bolt. I grabbed a hold of the tube, and I just started to pull, and I looked down, and he had opened his eyes, and his eyes only had turned towards me. but they weren't wild, they weren't crazy, they weren't like, oh my God, I'm going to get out of here. He just looked at me. He closed his eyes again, and I pulled this tube out, and it had begun to heal, and so it wasn't real super easy to get out. Excuse me. And so I pulled this thing out, and then some stuff came out of it, and so I had to take this towel, and I set the tube aside. I had to get this towel and clean up his face. And he sat there during the whole time. And I wiped his face off, and it was, how cats are, this gunky stuff was on him, and cats, they're always into self-cleaning and stuff, and he just sat there. And finally it was over, and I set everything aside, and he just stayed in my lap. And we sat there together for, it seemed like a really long time. It was probably maybe another 5 or 10 minutes, but it was absolutely incredible to me. And I kind of walked away from that situation, and eventually I set him down on the floor, and he began to kind of go on his way, and he began to tend to it himself the way animals do. And being a student of metaphysics and New Thought, religious science, I think about this idea of the transformational ways that we are encouraged to take our lives, and we are taught to live in intention and live in creativity, and to be able to show up in healing and show up in change. And when I would look at my life, and I would see where somewhere there was a breakdown in terms of what I was doing. What was I doing? How was I showing up in that? And I would explore that. And what I found from Lynx was that Lynx was living his life, and he became involved in a challenge, and setting aside for a moment, how that's attracted or how that's manifested. Here we are, we're in the challenge, right? We're in the COVID, we're in the fire, we're in the change, we're in the diagnosis, okay, in that moment. So we're going, and we think for a moment, okay, how do I move forward into this? How do I get to the other side of it? And in that moment, and I don't know how you guys are going to feel about me saying this, but I got to thinking, I wonder when he found himself in the midst of this challenge, when he found himself wounded and not feeling good, what was his prayer? What was his prayer? What did that prayer sound like? Because I saw the stages of, at first when I got involved with him with the animal carrier, he was fighting me all the way. And he didn't really like being at the vet's office. He didn't like being there for a day or so before they let him loose. And he probably didn't like this tube there, but I saw something happen. That for me, there was a sense of surrender. There was a sense of opening up. There was a sense of turning towards this power we call God. Okay, I've done my prayer. I have this challenge. I've done my prayer. I've shown up in this. I'm navigating these waters. And now it's about opening up to spirit. Opening up to, that there is a manifestation happening here. And however that happens, it happens. And to surrender ourselves into that. In the teachings of New Thought, that's where we see surrender. We surrender, in other words, excuse me, we embrace this idea of, I don't know how, but God does. We don't say, I don't know what, but God does. We say, I don't know how. I have a challenge. I want to look for the highest good. I want to create the highest good. I want to navigate this. I don't know how, but God does. And it's like, in the title of the talk today is Open Arms, because when I think about open arms, open arms have such a spiritual and religious context. We've all seen images of people with whether they're in church singing and their arms are open, or it's someone who's looking at the universe, looking at the sky with their arms open, or some sort of a prayer we open up in terms of our arms. And so there's this idea of opening up. There's this idea of surrendering into, of being in the presence of. And what I saw in Lynx, this cat, what I saw him do was whatever his prayer practice was, he came to that place to where he simply opened up. And so in his mind somehow, I became one of the tools that God was using to allow him to manifest a healing. Now, he wasn't totally sold on this when it came time for the pet carrier, you know what I'm saying? But at some point, there was a shift within him to completely open up. Ernest Holmes says, "Spirit stands at our door and knocks. We must open that door if we are to receive. To be able to open it, we must believe the Spirit is indeed in our presence." So in other words, in order to open up, there has to be a faith. There has to be a knowing. There has to be Spirit is here. Spirit is indeed in our presence always, and we must leave ourselves open to a conscious influx of Spirit. And so I became a tool of Spirit. I became the influx of Spirit. The vet did, I did, the Swiss Army knife, the towel, the chair, coming in from outside. It's like, okay, Andy, I'm here. God is all there is. God is here. Andy, I guess you're part of that. So let's get on with it. For it, Spirit, plays no favorites, and the law of the universe cannot reverse its own nature. It is we who must open up to greater fields of receptivity. We think so often that our manifesting is to get something. And I love what Ernest Holmes said at some point, within his work. There is nothing to heal, only to reveal, to open up to. And so in this moment, this cat and I came into a place of absolute receptivity. My receptivity to say, okay, I'll show up in this any way I can, including to the vet. Hey, Andy, can you do this? Okay. Cut the stitches, pull it out, wipe the stuff off, right? I mean, the vet had faith that the cat wouldn't fight me on this. And obviously, she knew the cat better than I did. She understood the spiritual perceptions of the cat, the spiritual practices of the cat, being Lynx. Oh yeah, Lynx is good. Lynx is spiritually good. Lynx is open to it. He's open. He'll come in. He'll do whatever it takes to get to the other side. As someone who works in counseling for the last several years at different levels, one of the things that you're trained in as a counselor is you're taught the stages of change. And stages of change are pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. Okay, and I've thought a lot about spiritual mind treatment and prayer and the teachings of religious science around the idea of stages of change. And see, what happens is, this place of where we go from contemplation through preparation and action, that's where we tend to struggle. That's where we tend to, contemplation. Okay, this is the challenge. I got clobbered in the face, and now my prayer. Once my eyes started swelling shut and my face began to swell up, my prayer was, I want to heal this. I want to be restored. I want to come back to being comfortable. I want to get to the other side of this challenge. Okay, that's my contemplation. My preparation is to open up to direction. In metaphysics, we're taught about synchronicities. In other words, when something comes up and we have a challenge in front of us and we really don't know what to do, and we've done our prayer work, we're opening up to God. And so we assume, and this is what Holmes means when he says God is knocking, and suddenly things begin to show up. The cat walks into the house. The people he shares his life with notice there's something wrong. They're the ones with the ATM cards. They're the ones with the car. Okay, so they show up in that. There's a synchronicity. They take him to the vet. He doesn't want to go at first, but he finally, like, they force, sometimes synchronicity can kind of force us into a place, okay? So then the medical knowledge comes into play, and everything is set up in the right way. And so the action, and this is what's interesting. I want you to think about this for a moment. Think of the word action in terms of letting go, in terms of opening up. Isn't that amazing? I mean, we think of action like we have to get up and suit up and show up, and those are all good ideas. But in terms of working with our lives, the action part of it is this place of surrender. In my own life, and in the lives of people I've worked with for years, where I see very often what happens is that, you know, a crisis will come along, a problem will well up, there'll be the phone call with the bad news, or the loved one who does whatever, and this person is starting to kind of make some progress, and then it's suddenly like I've got to break loose. I can't handle this. I have to move on. I have to somehow assert my ego into it. And as a counselor, what you want to say is, look, you know, things are going in a good direction. Don't let this blow you out. Open up, accept, trust. Go get in the dude's lap and let him cut the stitches out with the army knife, and pull the drain out of it. Let him wipe off your face. It's going to be okay. It's part of the healing. There's maybe something unpleasant going to happen that's going to be part of the healing. I've seemed to have attracted a number of conversations this week where the idea is, wow, I think I'm doing better, and then, you know, and I'm on a roll, and suddenly I manifest all this stuff bubbling up. I manifest all these issues, all these challenges, all this discomfort. And basically, what we know about the way that creation takes place, the way that birthing takes place, the way that manifestation takes place, very often it's incredibly uncomfortable. I'm sure that when I pulled that piece of plastic out of his face, that was not comfortable. I'm sure that when he looked up at me and realized that, you know, I've never been within a million miles of becoming a veterinarian, that, you know, this guy's got a freaking Swiss Army knife. He's coming at me and he's going to pull this out. I'm sure that was uncomfortable. But it's about trusting. It's about opening. It's about letting go. I remember when my kids were young and they would get incredibly tired, and they were, you know, and kids get so cranky when they're tired. And so you maybe approach them and say, let's put your jammies on, let's go to bed, you know, go grab your stuffed bear. No, I don't want to do that. And they would fight you and fight you and fight you. And finally, you know, the thing that every parent wants to see is when they just kind of flop on the floor and they put up their arms. You know, they open their arms, and you're able to go over there and pick them up and hold them close. And there's nothing like the hug of a kid when they're completely surrendered into being tired, and you pull them up and they hug your neck, and it's just so beautiful when they do that. They've surrendered, they've given in. Okay, give me the teddy bear. I'm done. You know, okay, dude, pull out the drain. I'm done. It's okay. I open up to the vehicle of whatever that may be. Holmes says openness should be practiced in a calm, expectant manner, expressing a deep inner connection of belief and expectation. And when I told you about the lessons that Lynx taught me in that whole thing was, in terms of my own spiritual journey, is this right here, the calm, expectant manner, expressing a deep inner connection of belief and expectation. In that moment, he believed in the process, and he had an expectation that whatever was on the other side of it was going to be to his advantage. That's amazing to me. Holmes in the back of his Science of Mind textbook, he has a little piece in there where he talks about intuition. He talks about this idea that he said, well, animals have instinct and we have intuition. And he says something to the effect, it just came to me just now, I can't remember. He said something to the effect of, we have a lot to learn from the animals because they intuitively know when it's time to surrender, when it's time to allow spirit to flow in. He said, an individual alone in consciousness with spirit constitutes a complete majority. Thus, we must always expect the highest good, the highest outcome. And this is that's what we open up to. So I know that, a lot of us in this world today, the last few years have just been such a huge shift. I don't need to sit here and give you the laundry list of what's been going on, not only in the world, but locally and everything else for a lot of us. This whole area, the whole world is being impacted in all kinds of different ways. This is, believe it or not, this is one of those times where we have to simply, do our prayer work, enter into the stages of change and be willing to move from contemplation through preparation and into action. And I believe that spiritually, what action is asking us to do is to open up to spirit, however it shows up and whoever it shows up through, because spirit is there for us. Well, thank you so much for joining in today and for giving me some of your time. I really super appreciate that. So now we are going to go into the offering.